Did you know? Shrek is actually based on a children's book written by William Tighe simply titled Shrek. The book follows Shrek on a daily walk. We see him breathe fire, conquer a dragon, and get married. With the exception of a few characters, the book hardly bears any resemblance to the movie adaptation. The first Shrek film, however, had a very long, interesting development. Steven Spielberg discovered the book in 1991 and bought the rights to it. Spielberg intended on turning it into a traditionally animated film with his company, Amblimation, who had also produced Balto and An American Tail, Fievel Goes West. He had envisioned Bill Murray in the role as Shrek, with Steve Martin as Donkey. But this version of the film never came to fruition. The final version of the film only exists because of a falling out at Disney. In 1984, Michael Eisner became the CEO of the Walt Disney Company and named Jeffrey Katzenberg as the head of the motion picture division. He then led the Disney Renaissance, which sparked a revival in the quality of animation and storytelling in the Disney films of the time. Katzenberg turned the studio around with such hits as Who Framed Roger Rabbit, The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, and The Lion King. However, things took a tragic turn in 1994 when Frank Wells, Eisner's second-in-command and president of Disney, was killed in a helicopter crash. Katzenberg felt that he should be the one to replace Wells, but Eisner refused to promote him. This led to an altercation between the two that resulted in Katzenberg leaving Disney on bad terms. Shortly thereafter, Katzenberg founded DreamWorks Studios with Steven Spielberg and David Geffen, with Katzenberg leading the animation department. In 1995, the children's book Shrek was brought forth to DreamWorks, where it caught Katzenberg's eye. DreamWorks acquired the rights, presumably from Steven Spielberg, and then put the film into production. The animosity between Eisner and Katzenberg supposedly led to the creation of Lord Farquaad, who bears a striking physical resemblance to the Disney executive. Farquaad lives in a squeaky clean theme park that parallels Walt Disney's Magic Kingdom. He also made his business by kidnapping, relocating, and or selling off famous fairy tale characters, not unlike the Mouse House. Eisner is a tall man at 6'3", and Katzenberg stands at 5'4". Eisner once distastefully commented on Katzenberg, "I think I hate that little midget." This may be why Farquaad is so short, almost like a sort of revenge against Katzenberg's former boss. The name Farquaad is also thought to be a clever solution for getting away with saying "f***wad" in a children's film. Likely because of this falling out, Radio Disney was prohibited from allowing ads for Shrek to be aired on the station. The station said, "Due to recent initiatives with the Walt Disney Company, we are being asked not to align ourselves promotionally with the new release Shrek." Later on, this restriction was loosened to allow ads for the film soundtrack. The DreamWorks version of Shrek was originally planned to be a hybrid live-action and CG animation film using background plate miniature sets with all of the main characters composited into the scene. Despite having a large crew hired to run tests with a year of research and development, the test screen had a terribly negative reception. Katzenberg stated, "It looked terrible, it didn't work, it wasn't funny, and we didn't like it." Moving forward, DreamWorks bought up animation company PDI, who assisted in developing Shrek's visuals to their final form. They had previously worked with DreamWorks on Ants, and carried over their proprietary software and techniques into the new film. However, for some of the more intensive scenes, such as animating dynamic cloth and human hair, PDI used the 3D animation software Maya. With 36 separate in-film locations, DreamWorks boasted that Shrek had a larger world than any computer-animated film before it. Chris Farley was originally going to play the titular character of Shrek. He had recorded between 80 to 90% of his lines for the character before he passed away due to a drug overdose. DreamWorks recast Mike Myers in the role, who insisted on a full rewrite so no traces of Farley were left in the movie. He wanted it to be wholly his character. Myers tried several accents for the role, including Southern and Canadian accents, before finally settling on a Midwestern accent.
"Hey, I'm no one's messenger boy, okay? I'm a delivery boy."
However, after recording all of his lines and well into the film's production, Myers requested to re-record the lines in a Scottish accent, similar to the voice his mother used when she read him bedtime stories. After hearing this alternate voiceover, Katzenberg agreed to put it in the movie. He was quoted as saying, "It was so good we took $4 million worth of animation out and did it again." Myers received a letter from Steven Spielberg thanking him for caring so much about the character, and that the Scottish accent had improved the movie.
"Hey, I'm no one's messenger boy, all right? I'm a delivery boy."
Janeane Garofalo was originally planned to play the role as Princess Fiona alongside Chris Farley. She was let go from the project for unspecified reasons and was quoted years later saying, "I was never told why I was fired. I assume because I sound like a man sometimes. I don't know why. Nobody told me. But, you know, the movie didn't do anything, so who cares? When approached for the role in Shrek 2, the casting director told actor Antonio Banderas that the character Puss in Boots was envisioned as French. However, due to Banderas' accent, Puss's character took on another form, similar to that of Zorro, another character Banderas incidentally played. This is referenced in the film when Puss uses his musketeer sword to scratch a P in Shrek 2. Also, because Antonio Banderas is multilingual, he provided the voiceover for the English, Spanish, and Italian versions of the film. The inclusion of I'm a Believer, covered by Smash Mouth, came out of a suggestion by Katzenberg to redo Shrek's ending. The song was chosen because of the opening line, I thought love was only true in fairy tales, which the film's producers thought matched the theme of the story. Rufus Wainwright's cover of Hallelujah appears on the film's soundtrack album but not actually in the film. Instead, Welsh singer John Cale's version is what is heard during the movie. Wainwright suggests that his version didn't make it into the movie due to a glass ceiling he was hitting due to his sexuality. However, an alternative explanation states that because Wainwright was a studio artist for DreamWorks and John Cale wasn't, licensing issues prohibited it from being listed on the soundtrack. A Shrek musical went into production in 2002, but didn't see the light of day until 2008 with its Broadway premiere. Despite the soundtrack of the films being a mix of oldies and modern pop, the musical went for a mostly original score minus the inclusion of I'm a Believer at the end. The stage production received a mixed reception, but was still nominated for 8 Tonys, including Best Musical and Best Original Score. They only managed to run off with Best Costume Design, however. A brief preview ran in Seattle for auditions before the Broadway premiere in 2008. The musical ran until 2010 in the US, but a European production still runs to this day. Lastly, it's rumored that Shrek himself was modeled after the French wrestler Maurice Tighe, also known as the French Angel. As a child, Tighe had actually earned the nickname the Angel due to his good supposed angelic face. However, at the age of 17, Tighe was diagnosed with acromegaly, which is a condition that causes bone overgrowth and thickening. Despite a striking resemblance to Shrek, DreamWorks has never openly commented on this.
Did you know? Mike Myers, Eddie Murphy, and Cameron Diaz each negotiated a paycheck of $10 million for their roles in Shrek 2. This was a significant pay raise from the original Shrek, where the three were each paid just $350,000. Shrek 2's total budget was $70 million, which means that roughly 43% of the film's budget went to Myers, Murphy, and Diaz. Jeffrey Katzenberg, then CEO of DreamWorks Animation, speculated that the payout was the highest in any of their careers and estimated that the three actors worked just 15 to 18 hours on Shrek 2. However, Katzenberg figured it was worth it for DreamWorks, as their vocal talents contributed an immeasurable amount to these films. Katzenberg had long believed that celebrities' voices only helped the potential success of an animated feature, and he began attaching such star power to his films, starting with Robin Williams in 1992's Aladdin. With Shrek, he continued to spearhead the trend. Katzenberg explained his philosophy to the New York Times, saying, "I can't imagine a 4 or 5-year-old is aware of the casting, but you are the one that has to bring the 4 or 5-year-old to the theater." Shrek 2 featured many more human characters than the first film, and DreamWorks leaned heavily on new animation technology to make sure they looked as realistic as possible. In particular, the company invested in hair animation so characters like Prince Charming would look as perfect as the audience expected. This also helped the fur on Puss in Boots interact more accurately with his belt and boots. The animation studio also wanted more realistic lighting and weather effects, including clouds, rain, and snow, so they could make scenes feel more dramatic and grounded. In particular, a scene in the film features Shrek, Donkey, and Puss in Boots getting soaked in a rainstorm, a situation which producer David Lippman believed hadn't been in a CG animated film up to that point. Though everything in all the Shrek films has to be generated inside of a computer, DreamWorks utilized analog artistic methods to design its characters and world. Several artists and sculptors were hired to create hundreds of pieces of concept art and clay models for all the locations and characters in the movies. In many cases, they used this process to refine a character's look. For example, there were nearly a dozen different clay models created for the King in Shrek 2, featuring different body types and looks before the final idea was settled on. When the sculpts were completed, artists recreated them with 3D modeling software for use in the films. In our previous video on Shrek, we mentioned how several real-world people and locations influenced the design of Shrek's world and characters, including Lord Farquaad and his theme park-inspired kingdom. However, these were not the only parts of Shrek inspired by the real world. Donkey's design was inspired by a real miniature donkey named Pericles at Barron Park in Palo Alto, California. To find inspiration for Shrek's swamp during the first film, art director Douglas Rogers visited a magnolia plantation in Charleston, South Carolina. Unfortunately for Rogers, he was chased by an alligator while exploring the swampland on his trip. To capture the look of other fantastical parts of the world, Rogers and fellow art director Guillaume Aratos traveled to Hearst Castle in California and the Dordogne region in France. Shrek has become one of the most popular and successful animated film franchises in history. Alongside the 4 main films in the series, the franchise includes 2 feature-length spin-off films, an animated TV series starring Puss in Boots, several short films, and 2 animated TV specials titled Shrek the Halls and Scared Shrekless. It also featured an animated short starring Simon Cowell that parodies the reality TV show American Idol. Additionally, Shrek has become a mainstay at several Universal theme parks, with a show known as Shrek 4D featured in most of their theme parks around the world. A full-fledged attraction known as Far Far Away is also present in Universal Studios Singapore, with a 40-meter-tall castle styled after similar attractions at Disney's theme parks. Shrek was even awarded a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame on May 20th, 2010, making him one of just 20 fictional characters to be given the honor. Mike Myers was present at the ceremony presenting Shrek with the star, where he joked, "It's an out-of-body experience." During the production of Shrek the Third, Adult Swim producers Tim Heidecker and Eric Wareheim became annoyed by the frequency of ads they were seeing for the upcoming film. In response, the pair independently created their own series of weird, low-budget, low-effort ads encouraging their fans to go watch the film. Monty Python comedians John Cleese and Eric Idle starred in Shrek the Third, though Idle wasn't happy with one joke in the film. Towards the beginning of the movie, a pair of coconuts are used to emulate the sound of horse hooves, a gag used in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Idle was furious at the joke's inclusion without his knowledge or consent, stating, "I mean, it's like there it is in the first 30 seconds. You go, wait a minute, John and I are in this film and you steal our joke?" He also accused DreamWorks of lifting jokes from their stage play Spam-A-Lot and said in a radio interview that he was considering suing the animation studio. DreamWorks claims that they included the joke as an homage to Monty Python, though Idle rebutted saying, "Do you think if I stole your wallet that'd be homage to your money?" Despite this, Idle never officially pursued any legal action against DreamWorks. The Shrek franchise has become one of the more interesting online fan bases, with New York Magazine describing the character as one of the patron saints of the elaborate and complex culture of dank memedom. Many fans of the franchise refer to themselves as brogers, a semi-satirical take on bronies, the adult fans of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. Several fans have used Shrek assets to create animations in Valve Software's Source Filmmaker, often placing Shrek characters into strange or adult situations. Many users jokingly began referring to the software as the Shrek Filmmaker because of the popularity of such videos. Shrek's theme song, All-Star by the rock band Smash Mouth, is frequently paired with these animations, but has also transcended the Shrek fandom to become its own meme. In May of 2012, fans of the series launched a 4chan-styled image board exclusively for Shrek content known as ShrekChan. Between its launch and March of 2014, ShrekChan garnered 500,000 visitors. However, the creator of ShrekChan shut the website down in 2014, explaining that the Shrek meme is dead and it's time to stop trying to keep this going. It is inevitable and it was going to happen at some point. They were incorrect, however, and the Shrek fandom continues to post and consume both serious and ironic content based on the franchise. Did you know? Toy Story began as a full-length sequel to the 1988 animated short film Tin Toy. After being kicked out of Disney for upsetting executives, animator John Lasseter joined Lucasfilm's graphics group division, which later split off and became Pixar. Lasseter wrote, produced, and directed the 5-minute Tin Toy short, which stars a tin one-man band toy trying to escape a destructive baby. It quickly received critical acclaim, winning the 1988 Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film. Pixar may have started out as a minor section of Lucasfilm, but it eventually became a studio focused on demonstrating the world's rising tech. The co-founder of Pixar, Ed Catmull's goal was always to make the first full-length CGI movie. Looking at the success of Tin Toy, Catmull quickly pitched a 30-minute TV special based on Tin Toy to Disney. The project never came together, but Disney decided to go one step further, proposing that Pixar make a 70 to 80-minute CGI feature film. Pixar ultimately agreed to a multi-picture deal with Disney. The studio felt the logical thing to do was expand on Tin Toy, and they did so under the working title Toy Story. A few other names were proposed for the project, such as The New Toy, The Cowboy and the Spaceman, The Favorite, and Toys in the Hood. Having only made shorts and commercials, Pixar greatly underestimated what they needed for a full-length CGI feature. The studio thought it could do a project with only 8 animators, but ended up needing over 30. One of the first changes Lasseter made was getting rid of Tinny after realizing he wasn't a well-thought-out character. He was changed to an action figure as it seemed more believable as a kid's new favorite toy. There were several names for this character, including Lunar Larry, but Lasseter finally settled on Buzz Lightyear, named after the real-life astronaut Buzz Aldrin. A second character was originally a ventriloquist dummy, which became a cowboy, and finally a pull-string doll. They named Woody after actor Woody Strode. An early script also had the toys finding their way to a sort of toy heaven. It was a preschool where the toys would never have to worry about being disowned, a concept that was later used in the series. With such drastic early changes, Lasseter knew one thing had to stay the same. The movie had to be about toys. This is because it was easier to believably render and animate plastic objects. Lasseter explained, "We knew what computer animation could do, and we knew what it couldn't do. Everything tended to look like plastic, so why not have the main characters made of plastic? Humans were by far the most difficult to create, so we told the story from the toys' point of view. So most of the time you saw Andy, his mom, and sister from their hands and feet." This was apparently lost on Disney, whose writers would try and add more human characters in every draft. Disney initially wanted Toy Story to be a musical as well, mainly because most of its animated films were musical dramas. Lasseter hated this idea, instead proposing to turn Toy Story into a buddy film. He had the story department draw inspirations from movies such as 48 Hours and The Defiant Ones. Joss Whedon, who was hired by Disney in the later stages of development to help work on the script, agreed with Lasseter. He said it would have been a really bad musical because it's a buddy movie. It's about people who won't admit what they want, much less sing about it. Buddy movies are about sublimating, punching an arm, I hate you. It's not about open emotion. Jeffrey Katzenberg, then chairman of Disney, demanded Pixar make Toy Story into a more adult and cynical film. A result of this was Woody becoming a sarcastic jerk with few redeeming qualities. This would result in huge issues for Pixar further into production. The studio brought in a collection of story reels and script drafts to Disney which featured both Buzz and Woody as mean-spirited heroes, and the company hated it. When Lasseter screened the film after a year of production, he saw that Woody had become a mean jerk. Woody's voice actor Tom Hanks agreed with this sentiment. Hanks said, "At first pass, Woody was a very acerbic kind of guy, edgy and unpleasant. It was hard to believe in him as the most popular toy in the bedroom." Lasseter and the rest of the team were forced to rethink and repair the film's concept within 3 months. If they failed, Lasseter knew Disney would pull the plug on them. Pixar got it right in the end, creating a happy finale where all its toy characters are likable. Pixar were meticulous in designing the film's toys. While creating the Green Army Men toys, animator Pete Docter wanted to find out how they should move. To do this, Docter nailed a pair of sneakers to a wooden plank and recorded himself waddling around the Pixar office. Initially, Tim Allen was far from the #1 choice to voice Buzz Lightyear. Comedian and actor Billy Crystal, who ended up voicing Monsters, Inc.'s Mike Wazowski, was offered the role. However, Crystal declined, believing he wasn't a good fit for the character. Crystal has since admitted this is the biggest regret of his career. Much earlier in the production, Toy Story's producers wanted Paul Newman as Woody and Jim Carrey as Buzz. This never came to be, as the film's small budget could not accommodate the two actors. For Lasseter, however, Tom Hanks was always the #1 pick to voice Woody, especially after he saw the character's concept art. Lasseter said that Hanks has the ability to take emotions and make them appealing, even if the character, like the one in A League of Their Own, is down and out and despicable. Tom Hanks didn't really understand the concept of computer animation, but he knew he had to be in the movie after seeing an animation of Woody synced up to dialogue from Turner and Hooch.
Don't eat the car! Not the car!
Interestingly, although Tom Hanks voices Woody in the movies, it's actually his brother Jim Hanks who voices Woody for video games and toys. Toy Story was the first feature film that stored digital characters, sets, and scenes in computers, eliminating the need for animators to redraw each cell. These assets could be reproduced infinitely, dramatically reducing most of the manual labor associated with traditional animation. After Toy Story released in theaters, it quickly became one of the most commercially successful and critically acclaimed films for Disney. Toy Story was the first animated film to be nominated for Best Original Screenplay, and this trend would continue with Pixar's The Incredibles, Finding Nemo, and Up. Likely because of Toy Story and Pixar's impact, the category for Best Animated Feature was added at the Oscars in 2001. Steve Jobs claimed it was the biggest advance in animation since Walt Disney started it all with the release of Snow White. It changed the way animated films were created from then on, and started the flood of CGI animated films in recent history, leading to some of the most commercially successful movies of all time. Did you know? James Cameron originally developed a script for a potential Spider-Man film in the 90s. However, Sony ultimately decided not to use Cameron's ideas nor hire him as a director, despite him pursuing the project for quite some time. Cameron's Spider-Man film would have been drastically different from Sam Raimi's trilogy. First off, Cameron's film would have been R-rated due to its language and violence, with Peter Parker cursing at thugs and the man who killed Uncle Ben. Cameron also talked about Peter Parker's transformation from a scrawny teenager to a full-blown superhero as being like Kafka's The Metamorphosis, a 1915 novella about a traveling salesman transforming into a massive, insect-like creature. Cameron also preferred Peter Parker to have organic web shooters rather than it being mechanical, which Sam Raimi and scriptwriter David Koepp kept. This was because Raimi believed that audiences wouldn't be able to accept Peter Parker building mechanical shooters from scratch. The main villains in Cameron's version would have been both Electro and Sandman. David Koepp made Green Goblin the antagonist instead, mainly because Sam Raimi felt that the strange father-son relationship between Norman Osborn and Peter Parker would make for a more interesting movie. Dr. Octopus was also planned for the first Raimi film as a side villain, but was removed to streamline the film. But he made Dr. Octopus the villain in the sequel 2 years later. Spider-Man ultimately had 4 contributing writers, and 3 of them, James Cameron included, voluntarily relinquished all credit to Koepp. Raimi was officially hired in January 2000, and his passion for comic books ultimately earned him the job. Before Raimi, however, Sony was seriously considering David Fincher for the director's chair. Fincher didn't want to do an origin story, and instead wanted to adapt the night Gwen Stacy died story arc. Fincher told IO9, "I was never interested in the Genesis story. I couldn't get past a guy getting bit by a red and blue spider. It was just a problem. It was not something that I felt I could do straight-faced. I wanted to start with Gwen Stacy and the Green Goblin, and I wanted to kill Gwen Stacy." Fincher wanted to have a darker and more grounded take on the Marvel hero, but Sony disagreed. Fincher also wanted to solve the origin story issue by making an interesting opening sequence. The title sequence would have been a 10-minute music video that went through the entire Peter Parker origin story, and the movie would start with Peter meeting Gwen Stacy. The face of the Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, Tobey Maguire, was far from the studio's first choice for the role. Colin Farrell, Ewan McGregor, Scott Speedman, Wes Bentley, and the late Heath Ledger were all scouted for the part, but Raimi wanted Maguire. Raimi eventually got his way after Maguire had some promising screen tests. Hugh Jackman was cast as Wolverine in the late 1990s, with the first X-Men film releasing in 2000. At the time, both Fox, who owned the X-Men franchise, and Sony agreed to work together and make a small cinematic universe of sorts before Marvel started theirs. Hugh Jackman was originally supposed to do a cameo as Wolverine in the first Spider-Man movie, but a small issue with his costume prevented that from ever happening. Jackman told the Huffington Post, "In the first Spider-Man, we really tried to get me to come on and do something, whether it was a gag or just to walk through the shot or something. The problem was, we couldn't find the suit. The suit was stuck in something, and so when they were there in New York when I was there, we couldn't get it together." Raimi was set to direct a 4th Spider-Man movie scheduled for a 2011 release. The movie would have had James Vanderbilt as a writer, and its villains would have included Mysterio and the Vulture. The script went through several revisions, but Raimi wasn't satisfied with how it was turning out. This was also planned to be the first entry in a whole new trilogy of films. However, Raimi eventually threw in the towel, and gave Sony his blessing to do a reboot instead. Although the project was scrapped, Vanderbilt was kept on to write for The Amazing Spider-Man. Although The Amazing Spider-Man movies disappointed some, the first movie was one of the highest-grossing reboots of all time. Sony even intended The Amazing Spider-Man 2 to launch an expansive film universe to compete with Marvel's Cinematic Universe. In 2013, Sony announced a 3rd Amazing Spider-Man film with a release date of June 10, 2016. They also announced a 4th film slated for May 4, 2018, with extended universe films featuring the Sinister Six and Venom. However, the series' future became unclear when Amazing Spider-Man 2 had the lowest box office performance in the franchise. The Amazing Spider-Man 3 was delayed to an unspecified date in 2018, and the 4th movie was moved to an unknown date. Following the 2014 Sony hack, the company was revealed to be in talks to have Sam Raimi return and direct a new trilogy, and were in contact with Marvel about including Spider-Man and Captain America: Civil War. Marvel was reportedly unhappy with Sony's desire to retain the Spider-Man film rights, and talks with both Raimi and Marvel fell through. However, Sony and Marvel later announced that a new Spider-Man would appear in Captain America: Civil War, and that Sony would be making Spider-Man: Homecoming, produced by Kevin Feige and Amy Pascal. Writers Jonathan Goldstein and John Daly were given 3 days to present Marvel with a pitch for Homecoming screenplay, and confirmed shortly after that they got the gig. The duo proposed a completely different take on Spider-Man, opting to focus on the high school aspects of Peter Parker and a realistic approach to what a young person might do if they had superpowers. Goldstein and Daly believed the past films in the franchise focused on drama, tragedy, and the origins of Spider-Man, and wanted to avoid treading the same ground. They even made a list of elements that were repeated in previous films and tried to avoid using them in Homecoming. Daly saw the film as an origin story of Spider-Man finding his place in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Goldstein saw it as a film about Peter Parker coming to terms with his abilities and confronting real fears as he grows and improves his powers. The writers also wanted to avoid skyscrapers to make Homecoming stand out visually, and instead wrote in locations such as Queens, the Staten Island Ferry, and Washington, D.C. Instead of aiming for a modern feel in Homecoming, director John Watts wanted to give the film an 80s vibe. To achieve this, Watts told the cast to watch movies such as Pretty in Pink, Breakfast Club, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and Back to the Future. Star Tom Holland tried emulating Back to the Future specifically, and told Yahoo Movies that he wanted to be his generation's Marty McFly.
But you know what she's like. If she finds out people try and kill me every single night, she's not gonna let me do this anymore.
In April 2016, Michael Keaton was slated to play a villain in Homecoming, but dropped out of talks due to scheduling conflicts with his role in The Founder. Talks began again after scheduling for The Founder was restructured, and Keaton sealed the deal. The cast of Homecoming come from all walks of life, which wasn't accidental. Watts said that he wanted the cast to reflect how diverse Queens is in real life, and Kevin Feige said he wished everyone recognized themselves in every portion of the Marvel Universe. Keeping the film grounded also had the side effect of keeping the film's budget relatively low. In fact, Homecoming has the smallest budget of any recent Spider-Man film, besides the original 2002 Sam Raimi movie.
Did you know? The mosquito shown in Jurassic Park's cloning explanation sequence is one of the few species of mosquito that doesn't actually suck blood. The preserved insect belongs to a species called Toxorhinchides rudilus. It probably fed on plant matter like sap, fruit, and nectar, explaining how it got entombed in amber in the first place. Even if the mosquito was part of a species that consumed blood, this particular mosquito wouldn't have. That's because this one is male, and only female mosquitoes suck blood. The sex of mosquitoes and DNA extraction would be the least of the park's problems, however, as DNA is only readable for a maximum of 1.5 million years. The oldest DNA on record is up to 800,000 years old, found in ice from Greenland, and the last of the dinosaurs died out around 66 million years ago. At the time of Jurassic Park's production, however, writer Michael Crichton's idea of extracting dino DNA from insects hadn't been discredited. It even had support from the scientific community, and was easily the most rational method of resurrecting prehistoric creatures. The allure of a reasonable explanation sparked Spielberg's imagination, and gave him the confidence he needed to bring dinosaurs to life on the big screen.
What do they got in there, King Kong?
Spielberg remembered how impacted he was by seeing Universal Studios' now closed Kongfrontation tour. Because of the believability of the ride's massive King Kong models, he originally wanted to construct all of Jurassic Park's dinosaurs as life-size animatronics. It quickly became apparent that creating dozens of full-size moving models would be too expensive, so Spielberg assembled an expert team of effects artists to make dinosaurs using various methods. Stan Winston and his studio would design the look of the dinosaurs and create a few life-size animatronics. Phil Tippett was set to make stop-motion miniature dinosaurs. These miniatures would be embedded into the film using post-production by Dennis Murin and Industrial Light and Magic. And Michael Lantieri would manage the technical usage of dinosaurs on set with the actors. To bring a level of authenticity to the project, award-winning paleontologist Jack Horner was consulted to make Jurassic Park's attractions as scientifically accurate as possible. Horner is known as somewhat of a maverick in the scientific community, and was actually the inspiration for the character Dr. Alan Grant. Spielberg storyboarded every scene in Jurassic Park using a small camera, models, and toys. He gave some storyboards to Phil Tippett, who recreated them as stop-motion animatics. Spielberg was so impressed, he asked Tippett to adapt every dinosaur scene into stop motion. One of these early animatics depicted the raptors with lizard-like tongues, which sparked a harsh reaction from Jack Horner, reportedly saying, "Whose stupid idea was that?" Horner's goal was to make sure Spielberg's dinosaurs were held to modern scientific standards as being bird-like and lively, rather than slow and reptilian. The raptors did deviate from scientific standards, however. The species of raptor in the movie is referred to as velociraptor. Actual velociraptors were about the size of a turkey and appropriately covered in feathers. In Jurassic's defense, fossil evidence didn't show that the majority of theropod dinosaurs were feathered until a few years after the movie was released. Though, that doesn't excuse the difference in size. Coincidentally, remains of a large raptor species were found elsewhere during production of Jurassic Park. Utah raptor was estimated to be about 7 feet tall, not much larger than the man-sized raptors in the movie. Stan Winston jokingly said, "We made it, and then they discovered it." The movie had other inaccuracies and fabrications, such as the Dilophosaurus that attacks Dennis Nedry. There's no evidence at all suggesting the animal spat venom or even had a frill. Dilophosaurus was depicted much smaller than its prehistoric counterpart. This was apparently to make sure audiences didn't confuse it with the raptors, even though a fully grown Dilophosaurus could grow to be 23 feet long. The on-screen raptors truly were man-sized, and even had men in them. Most dinosaurs were animated through segmented puppetry and robotics, but these methods were limited, and full-body, mobile raptors were necessary for certain parts of the film. Raptor suits were made by sculpting a full-sized clay model, and then taking molds of the model and wrapping them around frames for the actors to wear. This same molding method was used to make all the puppets and animatronics, even the big ones. Jurassic Park's T-Rex was painstakingly sculpted over a period of 16 weeks. It was so big, the studio roof had to be raised so they could construct it. People from the theme park industry were brought in to work on the T-Rex's hydraulic core. The final specifications of the Tyrannosaur animatronic had never been achieved in film, or even in the industrial trade. When representatives from a hydraulics company found out what Winston wanted the dinosaur to be capable of, they said his studio was insane. Mechanical designer Evan Brainard said, "I knew we were on the right track when those guys said we were crazy." The final model could move 90 inches per second at the tip of the nose, and some of the structure's hydraulic valves could push 60 gallons of fluid per minute. According to Winston's studio, the full animatronic weighed 9,000 pounds, about half as much as a real T-Rex, and the hydraulics were designed to handle a specific weight. This became a problem during production when Spielberg made a last-minute change to the T-Rex encounter, deciding it would look better in the rain. Winston told the director their model wasn't built to work in the rain, and that the dinosaur soaking up the water and getting heavy could be disastrous. Spielberg went ahead with the change anyway. The excess weight caused the T-Rex to shudder uncontrollably, forcing Winston's team to desperately try to dry it off with rags. The scene ended up being fairly different from its stop-motion animatic, such as Ian Malcolm originally deserting the kids instead of saving them with a distraction. One obvious difference was the inclusion of CGI. Dinosaur long shots were originally going to use Phil Tippett's go-motion animation, but Dennis Muren convinced Spielberg to use CGI instead. Muren developed prototype footage of Gallimimus skeletons running through a field in Hawaii. Spielberg was in awe at the quality of the animation and asked for a test shot of a fleshed-out dinosaur. This resulted in a sequence where a Tyrannosaur hunts down a herd of Gallimimus, similar to the shot in the final film. Spielberg broke the news to Phil Tippett and showed him the footage of the T-Rex hunting. Tippett took one look at the footage and said, "I think I'm extinct." The director liked Tippett's response so much that he actually used it in the film.
And we're out of a job. Don't you mean extinct?
Phil Tippett's traditional animation skills didn't go to waste, however. The team developed the Dinosaur Input Device, or DID, which had computer-generated dinosaurs wired to a physical miniature skeleton. Tippett could move the skeleton into position and create stop-motion frames. These frames would then be sent to Industrial Light and Magic and be smoothed out and rendered for use in the film.
Oh, there it is.
Did you know Space Jam was inspired by a commercial for Air Jordan sneakers? In 1993, Nike ran a commercial featuring Michael Jordan and Bugs Bunny. They squared off against Marvin the Martian in a game of basketball over a pile of Air Jordans. Jordan also appeared alongside several other Looney Tunes characters in commercials for MCI Communications after Space Jam's release. When shooting the film, Warner Brothers moved a wooden basketball court from Long Beach State University to their studio lot in Hollywood just for Jordan to practice on. Assisted by revered NBA trainer Tim Grover, Jordan went through a rigorous physical conditioning program to stay in shape for the film. This saw him lifting weights during his lunch hour and playing pickup games nearly every night with other players like Charles Barkley, Sean Bradley, and Magic Johnson. While filming, Jordan would often lightheartedly taunt the extras he played with on set, including Keith Gibbs, who remembered, "One play, Jordan hit a 35-footer on me. I mean, it was ridiculous. Leg out, tongue out, all that stuff. Hit a 35-footer on me and goes, 'Get the off the court.'" The film's post-production and visual effects were handled by Sinside, whose founder Ed Jones received an Academy Award for Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Space Jam's animation was done with a program called Animo, which allowed animators to call up drawings frame by frame during a shot. The program employed a built-in palette that colored characters in flat, bright colors, all of which could be changed at will without having to redraw art assets. Producer Ron Tip explained the advantages of the program, stating, "If you compare the traditional art in the ink process of Xeroxing the artwork onto cell and painting it by hand, there's a great savings in time. With original cell paint, very often only 1 or 2 colors at a time could be painted. You would have to wait for those colors to dry and then repaint it, so it was a very exhausting process. Wendy Allsworth added, "We're averaging about 4 minutes for every cell that's painted. Traditionally, if you hand painted that stuff on acetate, it's more than 20 to 30 minutes per cell." Many scenes that Jordan shares with the Looney Tunes characters were shot against a green screen with extras dressed in green jumpsuits, though this often caused problems. Occasionally, one of the extras would briefly move in front of parts of Jordan's body. After a day's shooting was complete, co-directors of animation Bruce Smith and Tony Cervone would go over the footage and note whenever they spotted bits of Jordan disappearing. They would then plan out the movements of animated characters so they passed in front of Jordan, hiding the mistake. One of the more difficult sequences to animate was the final showdown between the Looney Tunes and the Monstars, though it wasn't because of what was happening on the court. The audience in the background was the problem. This entire scene takes place in the world of the Looney Tunes, so the 25,000 spectator audience had to be filled entirely with animated characters. The animation department partially got around the problem by duplicating several of the characters in the stands, changing their palette, and scattering them throughout the stands. However, they only had so many characters to work with, and the duplication would be noticeable if used too often. To fill the rest of the crowd, Ed Jones suggested that they film real people in colorful or bizarre costumes, wearing cartoon heads of either generic or specific characters. This footage was then scanned into a computer and manipulated further before being put into the necessary shots. Jones explained, "We've mixed and matched all these characters, mostly for the front rows. The audience is still going to see the motion in the back rows as they look up there. The crowd is part of the environment." Despite these hurdles, Space Jam went from conception to release in just 1/3 the time of a regular animated feature film. It's currently the highest grossing basketball movie ever made, grossed over $250 million by the end of its theatrical run. The song "I Believe I Can Fly" was written by R. Kelly, specifically for the Space Jam soundtrack. The piece reached #2 on the Billboard charts, won 3 Grammys, and is still one of the singer's biggest hits. In February of 2014, it was reported that a sequel to Space Jam starring LeBron James was put into development. Though representatives of James denied his involvement with the project, James was quoted in May of 2014 saying, "I've always loved Space Jam. It was one of my favorite movies growing up. If I have the opportunity, it will be great." In July of 2015, James' production company Spring Hill signed a deal with Warner Brothers to produce television, movies, and digital content after James received positive reviews for his role in Trainwreck. This has reignited the rumors that a Space Jam sequel starring LeBron James was back in development. Though no official sequel has been formally announced, a fan-made sequel to Space Jam was released in 2008 in the form of the JRPG-inspired Barkley Shut Up and Jam Gaiden. Made by indie developers Tales of Game Studios, the title features Charles Barkley as the main playable character. LeBron James' great-grandson Balthios and Vince Carter are in supporting roles, and Michael Jordan is a reoccurring antagonist. The game's story is a continuation of Space Jam and takes place in 2053 on a post-cyber-apocalyptic Neo-New York, where basketball has been banned. All basketball players are either killed or rounded up after a chaos dunk is performed on the island of Manhattan, killing millions. It features many story elements used in the film, including the ultimate b-ball that the Monstars used to steal the powers of several basketball players. A sequel to the game, known simply as Barkley 2, was kickstarted in 2012 and raised over $120,000 on just a $35,000 goal. The character Honey Bunny, who had previously appeared in the Looney Tunes Dell comics, was originally planned to be Bugs Bunny's female counterpart. However, her character didn't make it past the design phase because, as one artist pointed out, she looked like Bugs' twin sister. A new character, Lola Bunny, was designed in 4 months. After Charles Barkley has his talent stolen in the film, he prays for them to come back, promising that he wouldn't go out with Madonna again. This scene was poking fun at a popular rumor that Barkley dated Madonna in 1993. The gymnasium where the Looney Tunes practice is named Schlesinger Gym, after Leon Schlesinger, the man who produced the very first Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies cartoons. Actor Bill Murray also has a cameo in the film, joining Jordan and the Looney Tunes team during the final match. Murray explains that he's there because he's friends with the producer producer. One of Space Jam's producers, Ivan Reitman, previously worked on both Ghostbuster movies with Murray. Murray's inclusion may have been due to other reasons, however. After Jordan had his first retirement from basketball in 1993, Murray mocked Jordan's now infamous press conference by claiming he was retiring from comedy to focus on playing hoops. Another more unorthodox cameo is made in the scene where Moron Mountain is shown from outer space, a black rectangle visible on the right edge of the screen, meant to be one of the monoliths from 2001, A Space Odyssey. The Monstars themselves later cameo in Star Warners, a crossover episode of the Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain.
Can I go home now?
Did you know? The makers of The Matrix hid several clever bits of world building within their films. They were very mindful of what colors were seen in the movies and where. Scenes set within the real world were color corrected in post-production to give off a blue tint, while scenes in The Matrix were given a green tint. They avoided using blue wherever they could while in The Matrix, as they felt the color represented the real world. In the Red Lady scene where Morpheus is explaining the danger of agents to Neo, every single one of the background extras is part of a pair of identical twins. The film's directors, Andy and Lana Wachowski, went out of their way to cast twins for this scene and this scene alone. It's mentioned that the character Mouse wrote this program, and the implications for all the identical twins is that he designed about half of what he needed, got lazy, and copy-pasted the code. The Wachowskis originally intended for the character Switch to be played by both a male and female actor, one in the real world and one in The Matrix. Because a person's avatar within The Matrix is their idealized self-image, this probably implied that Switch is transgender. This was perhaps an outlet for Lana Wachowski, who was dealing with similar issues at the time and eventually went through a sex change procedure herself. It's very likely that its creators originally envisioned a very different purpose for The Matrix in the films. It's generally thought that the Wachowskis wanted the machines to use humans as a makeshift neural processor for computing power. Supposedly, executives at Warner Bros. Forced the pair to change the idea and turn the humans into an energy source, fearing that a general audience wouldn't understand the concept. Another change was that the mega city within The Matrix was originally identified as Chicago in early drafts of the script, and many streets or landmarks called out within the film are references to real places in the Windy City. However, in the final product, the mega city represents any and all modern cities. To promote the release of the first Matrix film in theaters, Warner Bros. Contracted several writers and artists to create short stories and comics set within the blossoming universe, most notably author Neil Gaiman. The comics were relatively successful and were produced until 2004. They were eventually collected and published in 2 volumes by the Wachowskis' comic company, Burly Man Entertainment. These stories covered a variety of subjects, from rebels attempting to liberate babies before they were put into the Matrix, to the machines training a fighter pilot against aliens attempting to collide the moon with the Earth. Comics aren't the only medium the Matrix has found its way into. The Wachowskis openly count anime as a major influence for the franchise. They even offered collaborations to several prominent Japanese animators after meeting them during the promotion of the first film in Japan. The resulting series of shorts expanded the Matrix universe much further, and even gave us an origin story for the machines. It was released as The Animatrix. Though many works have derived from The Matrix, the film seems to have taken much of its premise from another project. The world of the Matrix franchise bears an uncanny resemblance to a comic book series titled The Invisibles, created by writer Grant Morrison. The comic features a group of leather-clad terrorists that possess otherworldly powers fighting against men in black-styled agents of the establishment, and the reality we know and understand is just an illusion to keep people subservient. The real world is ruled by insect-esque demons. Morrison himself described the similarities in his 2011 nonfiction book Super Gods: Our World in the Age of the Superhero. I was taken to see The Matrix and saw what seemed to be my own combination of ideas enacted on the screen. Fetish clothes, bald heads, kung fu, and magic. In a 2005 interview with Daniel Robert Epstein of SuicideGirls.com, Morrison claimed that the Wachowskis were definitely familiar with his work. I'd asked him to write one of the pre-release comics to promote the first Matrix, and that copies of The Invisibles were given to the Matrix trilogy's design staff and passed around on set as reference material. He also went on record saying that he isn't upset that the films copied his work, but wishes that he had somehow been credited or compensated for them. He also said that he enjoyed the first movie and wished that the 2 sequels had kept stealing his ideas. The opening scene where Trinity escapes from several agents actually got the rest of the movie made. After giving the Wachowskis the green light, Warner Bros. Balked at the projected $60 million budget, and instead gave the pair just $10 million. The duo spent the entirety of the $10 million filming this opening sequence and presented it to the executives at Warner Brothers. They were so impressed at the quality of this first chunk of the movie that they greenlit the rest of the film and agreed to give the Wachowskis the entirety of their projected budget. Interestingly, despite having several millions of dollars for this sequence, the set designers still had to recycle rooftop sets from 1998's Dark City because the budget was spread so thin. The Matrix could have had a very, very different cast. According to an interview with composer Don Davis, Johnny Depp was the Wachowskis' first choice for Neo, but Warner Brothers was not interested in the flourishing star. Instead, the studio wanted either Brad Pitt or Val Kilmer for the part, so much so that they would have greenlit the project on the spot if the Wachowskis could get Pitt for the lead. Nicolas Cage was approached for the role, but turned it down because he didn't want to spend a lot of time away from his family filming in Australia. Likewise, Will Smith was also approached, but turned it down in favor of Wild Wild West. Smith has since stated that he doesn't regret turning the part down because he would have gotten the character all wrong. Other actors considered for Neo were Leonardo DiCaprio, Ewan McGregor, and Tom Cruise, before Keanu Reeves eventually nabbed the part. Jean Reno turned down the part of Agent Smith because he was also unwilling to move to Australia for the production of the film. The part of Seraph was originally written for Jet Li, who refused because the studio was unwilling to pay him the $13 million he demanded. Samuel L. Jackson, Gary Oldman, and Chow Yun-fat were all offered the part of Morpheus, but turned it down for various reasons. As did Russell Crowe, who claimed, "I just didn't get it. I couldn't get past page 42. Another actor who declined a role because they did not understand the series' complex plot was Sean Connery. For a while, it was rumored that Warner Brothers approached him for Morpheus, but the part was instead later revealed to be that of the Architect. Connery's confusion now makes a lot more sense.
Did you know? The idea for Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory came from the Quaker Oats Company wanting to introduce a new brand of candy. The producer behind the movie, David L. Walper, was already in talks with Quaker Oats about finding a way to introduce a new candy to the world. Mel Stewart, who directed the movie, showed Walper the 1964 novel Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and he instantly fell in love with it. Walper convinced Quaker Oats to buy the rights to the book and finance a movie solely for the purpose of promoting a new candy called Willy Wonka's Super Scrunch and Peanut Butter Oompas. After the movie was finally released, Quaker Oats began marketing the candy. Several years later, Quaker Oats sold the brand to a company named Sunline, which is now owned by Nestle. Sunline was able to make the brand a resounding success, producing different types of Wonka brand candy. When the film first released, it wasn't a big success. However, the movie took off in the mid-1980s due to repeated television broadcast and home video sales. The movie is called Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory and not Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, so that the name would tie in with the real-life Wonka candy brand. The studio producing the film also publicly stated at the time that the title was changed to put emphasis on the eccentric central character of Willy Wonka. However, a 1970 article from the Los Angeles Examiner claimed it was due to increasing pressure from black groups, as the name Charlie was a label used for white men. It also didn't help that the movie was about chocolate, which further angered protesters. Director Mel Stewart confirmed these reports decades after in the film's 2002 making-of book. He also revealed that there were concerns about the Oompa Loompas. They're depicted as African pygmies in the original book illustrations. Stewart decided to give them the distinctive green and orange coloring to avoid controversy. The original book was written by Roald Dahl. Despite being a part of the scriptwriting process, Dahl hated how the film turned out. He specifically hated the casting of Gene Wilder as Willy Wonka and would have preferred comedian Spike Milligan to play the titular character instead. He was also against giving the movie a different name than the book. Dahl believed it put way too much emphasis on Willy Wonka and not on Charlie, which was who the novel was mainly about. He thought the scene with the fizzy lifting drinks was ridiculous as well. What infuriated Dahl the most, however, was the film's deviations from the original Chocolate Factory plot. David Seltzer converted Slugworth, who was a small character in the book, into a Wonka spy just so the movie could have a proper villain. The movie was mostly filmed on location in Bavaria, Germany. This led to controversy and criticism aimed at Walper and Quaker Oats. Members of the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees accused both of them for contributing to the problem of runaway productions. The film industry in Hollywood was facing issues with productions moving away from the United States, which damaged the industry, and the union argued that the movie's interior scenes could have been shot in Hollywood. Walper denied these claims, saying that the union was wrong and that less than 65% of the film's scenes were shot inside. Union leaders threatened to picket the film and disrupt its shooting, but it isn't known whether any actions were actually taken. Gene Wilder had a few particular requests before agreeing to play Willy Wonka. One was that Wonka had to pretend to be a cripple. Wilder wanted to fake a limp when first introduced to the audience and the children. When director Mel Stewart asked Wilder why he wanted to do this, he said it was to help give off the feeling that Wonka might always be secretly lying. Wilder said, "When I make my first entrance, I'd like to come out of the door carrying a cane and then walk towards the crowd with a limp. After the crowd sees Willy Wonka is a cripple, they all whisper to themselves and then become deathly quiet. As I walk toward them, my cane sinks into one of the cobblestones I'm walking on and stands straight up by itself, but I keep on walking until I realize that I no longer have my cane. I start to fall forward, and just before I hit the ground, I do a beautiful forward somersault and bounce back up to great applause." Stewart asked Wilder if he'd reject the role if the bit wasn't added, and Wilder's response was simply, "I'm afraid that's the truth." The kids also didn't know that Gene Wilder would emerge with a limp, which the actor also requested. They thought Wilder really had a problem with his leg. Towards the end of the movie, where Charlie is inside Wonka's office for the first time, Charlie's stunned reaction to Wonka yelling at him was also real. The director believed that Charlie's actor, Peter Ostrom, would have a more believable reaction if he was unaware of the oncoming shouting. Wilder desperately wanted to warn Ostrom about the yelling beforehand, as they'd become friends during filming, but the director forbade it. Wilder was also heavily involved with pretty much everything else about the Willy Wonka character, including his physical appearance. During pre-production, Wilder laid out a few changes he wanted to see with Wonka's costume throughout the movie. This includes what type of pants he should wear, the color and cut of his jacket, and the placement of every single pocket on it. For example, Wilder wanted Wonka's hat to be about 2 inches shorter than how it was first presented to the actor. During the chocolate room scene, the kids' reactions were in fact real, as this was the first time they saw the set. The chocolate river was made using real chocolate, water, and cream. The cast recalled that it smelled terrible and spoiled quickly. A number of the plants and objects in the chocolate room were also edible. Wilder said that about a third of the stuff in the room was edible.
I mean, you can eat almost everything.
However, the cup Wilder takes a huge bite out of in this scene was made of wax. Wilder would spit it all out in between takes. And the ear of the gummy bear was the only part of it you could eat, the rest was plastic. Another memorable scene was when everyone is licking the flavored wallpaper. Some parts of the wall were actually covered in jam to help improve the taste.
Did you know? The species name Ewok was never spoken during Return of the Jedi. They were instead named during the credits, in merchandising, books, and on television. They were the focus of 2 TV movies, Caravan of Courage and Ewok Adventure in 1984, and Ewoks: The Battle for Endor in 1985. Additionally, there was an animated Ewoks TV series that began in 1985 and ended the next year. Also, in The Empire Strikes Back, Boba Fett was only named in the credits, though you wouldn't be able to attach the name to the bounty hunter without an outside source, such as the animated segment of the Star Wars Holiday Special where Fett was first publicly named. However, Boba Fett was first introduced at the San Anselmo County Fair Parade in 1978, where he was portrayed by future Return of the Jedi editor Dwayne Dunham. Joe Johnston created the design for Boba Fett's armor. It was originally all white and meant to be used for Super Troopers, an unused concept soldier for the Imperial Army. The armor's color scheme was changed when it was instead given to the bounty hunter. In between the release of the original Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back, George Lucas wanted to retain interest in the franchise. He and his team were, however, too busy working on pre-production for the new movie. Lucas allowed a separate production company to create a holiday special, and sent over a few prominent crew members along with notes on Wookiee culture. This led the team to write a story where Chewbacca goes on a journey to the planet Kashyyyk to celebrate Life Day with his family. The special has all of the Star Wars main cast reprising their roles, and also included several celebrity guest stars. It featured B. Arthur, Art Carney, and Diane Carroll, who plays a singer in a virtual reality fantasy of Chewbacca's father. Mitzi Welch, a writer and producer for the special, explained that this scene was supposed to be a, quote, softcore porno that would pass the censors. The holiday special aired on CBS to 13 million viewers, with mixed reviews at the time. The special in its entirety has never had a re-airing in the United States, nor has it had a home media release, although bootlegged copies of the broadcast exist. Lucas was embarrassed with how the special turned out. However, the Boba Fett animated segment was made available in 2011 on the Star Wars The Complete Saga Blu-ray set. The holiday special wasn't the only festive encounter for the Star Wars franchise. In 1980, a Star Wars-themed Christmas album was released titled Christmas in the Stars. It featured Anthony Daniels returning as the voice of C-3PO, and Ben Burtt providing new sounds for R2-D2 and Chewbacca. The album was one of the first to be recorded and mixed digitally. During the recording session, producer Mecco wasn't satisfied with the lead singer for one of the songs, so one of the other producers, Tony Bon Jovi, suggested that they let his cousin John have a chance at it. John was hired at the studio to sweep the floors, but when he was called in to sing a few notes, Mecco was delighted and immediately hired John as the singer. Mecco recounts that after the recording, he encouraged John to make a full-time career out of his singing talent, but John had his doubts. This was John Bon Jovi's first professional recording, with him as the lead singer for R2-D2 We Wish You a Merry Christmas.
R2-D2 we wish you a Merry Christmas. We hope our little message gets to you.
For Return of the Jedi, Lucas wanted to showcase extraordinary alien creatures, as he felt that the previous Star Wars films were lacking in that aspect. He planned to have a race of 20-foot-tall creatures called Yuzzums to live alongside the Ewoks on the forest moon of Endor. Yuzzums were going to be played by a troupe of puppeteers on stilts, but the idea was ultimately scrapped as the cameras wouldn't be able to frame the Yuzzums on screen with the short Ewoks at the same time. The crew, not wanting their Yuzzums concept to go to waste, made a much shorter model of one to be put in the background of Jabba's court. In the 1997 special edition, a new Yuzzum was digitally added as a member of the Max Rebo Band. In the short story And the Band Played On, the band was originally known as Evar Orbis and his galactic Jizzwailers. Jizzwailer, a term introduced in the Return of the Jedi novelization, meaning a musician that plays upbeat music similar to jazz. Scenes with alien languages were performed in English and then later overdubbed.
Going somewhere solo.
On set, Jabba's voice was performed by puppeteer Dave Barkley, so that he could lip-sync Jabba while he spoke.
Your mind powers will not work on me, boy.
Before the special editions, George Lucas wasn't able to fit Jabba the Hutt in the first Star Wars movie, but for Return of the Jedi, he wanted Jabba's long-awaited appearance to be top-notch. The alien gangster went through many design concepts and revisions. At one point, they even considered giving Jabba a fez. One designed by Ralph McQuarrie was later repurposed for the character as Morrigan in the Star Wars Rebels animated series. For the final Jabba design, Phil Tippett was influenced by the caterpillar from Alice in Wonderland. The clay cast for Jabba weighed 4,000 pounds and was too large to fit inside any oven that they had available. So an entire room at ILM was converted to a walk-in oven to bake it. The completed puppet was 15 feet long from head to tail and had a hollowed fiberglass interior covered with latex skin to give the illusion of a solid, living creature. The puppet had to be emotionally expressive considering Jabba's hefty screen time. It ended up costing $500,000 to construct, which is over $1.2 million adjusted for inflation. 3 people sat inside the puppet to control its arms, mouth, head, and tail. In front of each of them was a small black and white monitor to watch Jabba's movements as a whole. A few other people handled the puppet from the outside as well. One crew member manipulated Jabba's breathing and other subtle bodily movements. Another blew smoke into a tube so that it would come out of Jabba's mouth. Jabba's eyes were articulated enough to blink, look around, and have the pupils dilate. This was all done by remote control operators. On his right arm, there is a tattoo carving of the Disilogic crime family symbol, an organization of which Jabba is a member. Lucas decided that Leia should kill Jabba by choking him in a manner similar to a scene from The Godfather. This was the last Jabba scene to be filmed in case the puppet was damaged. Years after the movie's completion, the Jabba puppet suffered severe deterioration, and unfortunately had to be thrown out in its entirety except for the eyes, which are on display at exhibits to this day. Dennis Muren, Phil Tippett, and John Berg used an Asian elephant from Marine World named Margie as visual reference for the AT-AT's movements. The walkers were filmed through the use of stop motion, and as a result they had no motion blur, making them seem more mechanical. This wasn't the first time Margie helped out with the Star Wars movie. She also played the Bantha ridden by Tusken Raiders in A New Hope. Ralph McQuarrie originally designed the Bantha as a costumed horse, to be ridden by actors of diminutive stature, but as the Tusken Raider design grew, so did their animal companion. Effort was made to make sure Margie's costume was comfortable at Death Valley, California, and her scenes were shot in January to ensure that there were moderate temperatures. The fur coat is made from palm leaves, the beard is from horsehair, and the horns were made with ventilation tubing as the base. The shot where two Banthas are shown standing next to each other are actually two separate shots of Margie composited together. Additionally, she was trained to keep her trunk in her mouth so it didn't ruin the illusion of an alien creature. Margie's trainer was dressed up as one of the Tusken Raiders and rewarded her with apples between takes.
Did you know? The Millennium Falcon had a major design change partway into production. The original design had a strong resemblance to a ship from the then-recent 1975 British TV show, Space 1999. In light of this, the Millennium Falcon was drastically altered, and only a few original parts such as the satellite dish and the cockpit were left intact. Some parts of the original model were recycled, altered, and repurposed as the blockade runner at the beginning of the film. Other ships have interesting origins. George Lucas's design notes for the TIE fighter describe the design as a finned sausage, and refer to a cover for the book The Stainless Steel Rat as inspiration. When writing Star Wars, Lucas was inspired by the 1958 Akira Kurosawa film The Hidden Fortress. Lucas said that the one thing that really struck me about Hidden Fortress, and I was really intrigued by, was the fact that the story was told from the two lowest characters. I decided that would be a nice way to tell the Star Wars story. Here, Lucas was comparing the two peasants in the Hidden Fortress to the two droids in Star Wars. In both movies, a duo argues, gets separated, and then eventually reunite after being captured. Lucas and producer Gary Kurtz at one point considered buying the rights to the Hidden Fortress because of how similar it was to the original Star Wars screenplay. Even the name Obi-Wan Kenobi has a Japanese sound to it. The renowned actor Toshiro Mifune, who starred as the general in the Hidden Fortress, was Lucas's first choice for Obi-Wan, but he turned down the role. According to Mifune's daughter, the Darth Vader helmet was designed as a kabuto for her father to wear and that his face would be visible, but he turned down that role as well. Star Wars was influenced by other movies, including the 1927 film Metropolis, which influenced C-3PO's design. Lucas also turned to the 1940 film serial Flash Gordon Conquers the Universe for the opening crawl and general plot elements. The 1935 Nazi propaganda film Triumph of the Will was used as a reference for the throne room celebration, and parts from a scrapped World War II British fighter jet engine were used as a beverage machine. This same prop was later used for IG-88, a droid bounty hunter that made a minor appearance in The Empire Strikes Back. In an early rough draft of Return of the Jedi's script, Luke confronts Vader while surrounded by molten lava, and the two hopped from one rock to another while fighting. This idea was eventually used over 2 decades later for Obi-Wan and Anakin's fight in Revenge of the Sith. Also, for Return of the Jedi, storyboards show Vader gaining control of Luke's lightsaber in the middle of their battle, and dual-wielding it along with his own. This idea was again scrapped, but remnants of it can still be seen in the final film as a continuity error. Vader holds Luke's unignited saber in his left hand, and in the next shot, it's back in Luke's. The concept of dual-wielding lightsabers was later used by Anakin in the prequels. Until the final draft of A New Hope, Obi-Wan was planned to survive his encounter with Darth Vader. However, Lucas realized that Obi-Wan didn't have any importance to the story after escaping the Death Star, so he decided to kill him off to make the Empire feel like a real threat. Later in Return of the Jedi, Obi-Wan was planned to come back in the flesh and assist Luke in defeating Darth Vader, but this was dropped in later drafts. Harrison Ford also felt that Han Solo's story was over, and that he should be killed in Return of the Jedi, but Lucas rejected this premise. Producer Gary Kurtz was concerned with Lucas's plans for Return of the Jedi, particularly about it being too lighthearted and featuring yet another Death Star battle. Lucas also had concerns about Kurtz, and blamed him for letting The Empire Strikes Back go over budget. As a result, Kurtz ended his involvement with the Star Wars franchise and was replaced by Howard Kazanjian for Return of the Jedi. After the movie's release, instead of jumping right into creating the prequels, Lucas instead eased up from Star Wars to raise his family. But when he saw Jurassic Park in 1993, the advancement in special effects convinced Lucas that it was now possible to create what he had in mind on the big screen. In order to prepare the Star Wars audience for the prequels, Lucas wanted to digitally enhance the original films using the new computer effects. He spent $10 million on updating A New Hope, which was nearly the same amount of money needed to make the movie in the first place. And Lucas spent $5 million total on revising the other two Star Wars movies. A New Hope Special Edition released January 1997 and was the highest-grossing PG movie that year. The other two movies released February and March. The special editions featured a few dialogue changes, some entirely new shots, and most notably, computer-generated models in place of existing creatures, technology that would be heavily utilized in the prequel trilogy. By the time Lucas began filming Episode 1 in 1997, he hadn't directed a movie since A New Hope 20 years earlier. While filming the prequels, the actors found it difficult to perform on a blue screen, as they had to imagine what would be added in post-production, especially with Lucas's undescriptive direction of what they should be reacting to. Ewan McGregor, who played the young Obi-Wan Kenobi, said, "It was a hard film to make because so much of it's not there, and the pretending is so much of it." Samuel L. Jackson, who plays Mace Windu, recalls, "There was also a guy with a duck on his head, I don't know what that was," in which he was likely referring to Ahmed Best wearing the Jar Jar costume, before they decided to completely replace it with CGI. Best recalled that Michael Jackson wanted to play the part of Jar Jar Binks, where he would wear prosthetics and makeup, similar to the Thriller music video, but Lucas wanted Jar Jar's face to be all CGI since the beginning of the project. Although the prequels are notorious for the excessive use of CGI, models and practical effects were still commonly used. And in fact, there's more of it in The Phantom Menace than the entire original trilogy. There were over 50 model makers working at Industrial Light and Magic, including Adam Savage, Jamie Hyneman, Tori Belleci, and Grant Imahara before they became the Mythbusters. The pod race arena was a model filled with hundreds of painted Q-tips blown by fans to make it look like a living audience. Pod racing may have been inspired by Lucas's teenage years of racing cars at fairgrounds, as well as the chariot race from the 1959 film Ben-Hur, which was used as a visual reference. There's also a deleted scene where Anakin gets into a fight because Greedo accused him of cheating in the pod race, which ends with Greedo being told, "Keep this up, Greedo, and you're gonna come to a bad end." For Darth Maul, Lucas asked concept designer Ian McCaig to draw a figure from his worst nightmare. McCaig came up with a creature with metal teeth and red ribbons coming out of its head. When Lucas saw the drawing, he quickly turned it away and said, "Okay, now draw me your second worst nightmare." McCaig then took influence from circuit boards, Rorschach patterns, and face painting from African tribes. His design even included feathers on Maul's head, but other crew members mistook it for horns, and that interpretation stuck for the final design.
Awesome! Yes, dudes and dudettes, Major League Butt Kicking is back in town! Oh yeah!
Did you know? The very first Ninja Turtles movie persisted through impossible odds, and it almost didn't get made at all. In 1988, the Ninja Turtles were enjoying huge success through comics, action figures, and their animated series. Soon movies would be added into the mix as well. The comic had caught the eye of Gary Proper, live-action movie maker and road manager for the comedian Gallagher. Proper loved the idea of a Ninja Turtles movie and teamed up with Gallagher's producer Kim Dawson to get a Ninja Turtles film underway. They also pursued Bobby Herbeck as their writer. They managed to get approval from Turtles creators Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, though there was still trouble abound. Despite the Turtles' success, nobody seemed interested in making a film. On top of the seemingly bizarre concept of Turtles being ninjas, making a live-action movie was a serious gamble at the time. Flops like Superman 4 and Howard the Duck were still fresh in everyone's minds, and though Tim Burton's Batman would break that streak, virtually every studio in Hollywood thought the team was crazy. Herbeck had been writing another film for Golden Harvest Studios and thought to pitch the idea to them, believing they'd be perfect for the job. The studio had a rich history with martial arts films, having released hits such as Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon and Jackie Chan's The Big Brawl. Studio executive Tom Gray claimed that Ninja Turtles was the stupidest thing he ever heard. He too wanted nothing to do with the film, and it took months to convince him otherwise. Though during a meeting, Gray had a sudden change of heart. He thought the movie would be as simple as putting 4 of their Hong Kong stuntmen in rubber suits. Gray then sent a memo out to Golden Harvest owner Raymond Chow, and the film was greenlit with a budget of $3 million. The movie found its footing once they brought director Steve Barron on board. Barron had previously directed music videos for Michael Jackson's Billie Jean and a-ha's Take On Me, and the team wanted that kind of visual flair for Ninja Turtles. Barron also happened to be a fan of the comic, marking scenes right from the books as inspiration for the film's story. He even took notes from the recently released animated series and said the film needed to be a hybrid of the show and the comic. Barron wanted to sport a kind of tone where the stakes were real, but there was also fun to be had. Though the budget didn't seem fit for it, Barron contracted Jim Henson's Creature Shop for the film's animatronics. Jim Henson and Steve Barron had a great relationship, having worked on several projects together. Barron was actually working on Henson's The Storyteller before getting the Ninja Turtles job from a colleague, though Henson was skeptical about the Turtles project. He'd seen the comic and thought it was too violent for his tastes, and was hesitant to tie his name to the film. Barron ultimately convinced Henson the film's tone was coming from a good place, and that it wouldn't tarnish his reputation. 4 turtle suits and Master Splinter were made over an 18-week period, and the Turtles came in 2 sets. A stunt set was made for action scenes, and a primary actor set had radio-controlled motors that moved the eyes, mouths, and eyebrows located in the shells. Where Henson typically developed one new piece of tech for a film, with Ninja Turtles he had to invent at least 6 to make it work. One innovation gave a single puppeteer control over complex animatronics, which previously required entire teams to control. Henson paved the way for future animatronics, and at the time of his passing said the Turtles were the most advanced thing he ever worked with. The team was still looking for a distributor, as Golden Harvest didn't have the funds to fund it alone, needing an additional $6 million. A previous deal with 20th Century Fox went out the window due to a change in management, and with no studio attached, the movie was on the verge of being shut down. Hours before Henson's crew flew out to start filming, Gray got New Line Cinema to shell out $2 million, which ultimately saved the project. Gray then called Raymond Chow, who paid the difference, mainly because Henson's company was on pay or play and would sue if they backed out now. Gray assured Chow they'd make their money back if they kept making the movie with their current direction. He then gave the call to Henson's crew to come on out, and filming began July 1st, 1989. When searching for turtle performers, 2 auditions resulted in collateral damage. Showing off their mock martial arts skills, Donatello's performer dented the wall, and Michelangelo's ended up putting his whole foot through it. Barron actually approved, saying, "Anyone who would put that much energy and go to that extreme for an audition deserves to be one of my turtles." Appropriately, the performers went through several months of training with a sensei in New York for their respective weapons. During this time, they also had to get used to the suits. While the suits weren't uncomfortable, they weren't easy to put on or take off either. They also got hot, and the actors lost nearly 20 pounds from profuse sweating by the end of it all. Raphael's in-suit actor and voice, Josh Pais, also experienced claustrophobia from being in the suit for a long time. Pais said, "We would just freak out, and you would hear one of us go, 'Take the head off! Take the head off! Take it off!' Your blood was literally boiling, and then they would shoot compressed air in our faces." The frustrations during filming would help Pais illustrate Raphael's anger, and the actors got more accustomed to the suits as time went on. Fight and dialogue scenes were recorded at 22 or 23 frames per second, and sped up to 24 FPS to compensate for the sluggish movement of the suits. Most of the film was shot in rural North Carolina at Wilmington Studios, with aerial shots of New York taken at the end of production. Even these shots posed challenges for the crew. Crickets were everywhere in the park scene, specifically when Casey and Raphael talk about cricket, and they had to be edited out as best as possible. Airplanes passing over to the local airport would also cause the animatronics in the suits to go haywire, resulting in many retakes. The film's visual look was designed by Roy Forge Smith, who wanted New York to be as authentic as possible. Smith and his art director went to Manhattan 4 months before filming began and took pictures around Bleecker Street, imagining the characters would live in the area. His construction team then transformed their studio backlot, renaming the set's buildings and aging everything to nail a Bleecker Street feel. Smith also took great care in making the turtle lair credible, even adding a tide line in the den to show it's likely been flooded a few times. Smith even showed early designs to 2 kids he knew who commented on the lack of empty pizza boxes, which were added soon after. During the trip to New York, Smith also tried getting access to an actual city sewer, but to no avail. However, Smith did get clearance to visit an abandoned century-old subway line that had what they were looking for. He also got access to a water tunnel whose pipes pumped water into the Central Park Reservoir, which was used for the opening scene. Said scene where the turtles walk home through the sewer took 9 hours to complete, as everything that could have gone wrong happened. The wet floor combined with the slippery latex suits meant that one of the turtles would often fall over during a take. And the heat didn't help, with Donatello's performer comparing it to trying to survive the heat in Vietnam, as it took 36 takes without a break. Similarly, the scene where Mikey and Donnie wait for pizza was done through the course of an entire day to get perfect. The actors and puppeteers worked out the choreography to make it all look seamless, right down to characters taking a breath. When the film was finished, it was taken to Show West for a preview screening. The auditorium was full of kids, and it was here the team knew their movie was going to be a hit. Opening March 30th, 1990, Ninja Turtles went on to become the highest-grossing independent film of its time, and the first to break $100 million at the box office. Looking back, Tom Gray had said, "Everybody who passed on the movie called me up on the Monday and said, 'God, how did we miss this?' And I simply said, 'You didn't believe in it.' So they said, 'Okay, we believe in its sequel.' Funnily enough, Fox, who originally turned the film down, internationally distributed the following movies in the trilogy, with New Line handling distribution for the USA.
God, I love being a turtle!
Did you know? When author J.K. Rowling put the multimedia rights for her Harry Potter novels on sale, several companies tried to obtain the license. Movie studios Disney, Universal, and Warner Brothers were locked in an intense bidding war for the rights, but another company also entered the fray: Nintendo. In the late 1990s, Nintendo of America's internal development team was suddenly ordered to halt their current projects when management heard that the Potter rights were being auctioned off. The developers were split into two teams and told to create pitches for a third-person adventure title and a game based on Quidditch. The studio wanted to develop these adaptations themselves and planned to release them across the N64, Game Boy Advance, GameCube, and any future Nintendo platforms to coincide with the release of new books. However, as the pitches developed, there were disagreements about the direction the team should go in. Both development teams wanted a Western, cartoony art direction similar to the cover art for the British version of the Harry Potter books, but Nintendo's higher-ups wanted the games to take inspiration from manga. The team's artists understandably disagreed with this decision, with one saying, "It went against all my instincts based on what I had read quotes from JK about keeping it strictly British, and I had to revamp my initial designs to go more manga/Japanese. I had a big fight about that, but my boss insisted." Nintendo's bid was declined by Rowling for unspecified reasons, but an anonymous source believed it was because she was more interested in proposals put forth by multimedia companies who weren't exclusively tied to video games. Warner Brothers eventually won the bidding war and began looking at directors for a film adaptation. Steven Spielberg was interested and wanted to condense several books into one motion capture CG animated film, similar to the Polar Express. Rowling was unimpressed with this interpretation and urged Warner Brothers to refuse. They agreed, and Spielberg passed on directing a live-action adaptation of the first book. Several other directors were considered for the Sorcerer's Stone, with Terry Gilliam being Rowling's personal choice, though Home Alone director Chris Columbus was hired in the end. When he was first hired, Chris Columbus intended to direct all the movies in the franchise. However, after shooting the first two, he realized that all 7 would have to be filmed relatively back-to-back, so that younger actors didn't age out of their roles. Word that he was gonna miss his own children growing up, Columbus departed after work was completed on the Chamber of Secrets. Both M. Night Shyamalan and Guillermo del Toro were considered as his replacement for the Prisoner of Azkaban, but the position eventually went to Alfonso Cuarón. Because he'd never read the books or seen the movies, Cuarón asked Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, and Rupert Grint to write papers about their characters so he could acquaint themselves with them. Watson, true to character, went overboard and wrote a 16-page paper about Hermione Granger. Radcliffe wrote a 1-page summary of Harry Potter, and Rupert Grint never turned anything in, claiming that Ron Weasley would have done the same. Cuarón laughed and said he was perfectly cast. As with the first book, the first film actually had 2 different titles. In North America, it's known as Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, but in the rest of the world, they're called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. This change was made because the book's publishers were worried that Americans, especially their target audience of children, would be unfamiliar with the legend of the Philosopher's Stone and how it relates to alchemy and magic. So, to more clearly indicate the series' subject matter, they changed the title to Sorcerer's Stone. The filmmakers did well to keep in line with this change, creating 2 different sets of posters, trailers, title cards, and merchandise with the separate names. They even went as far as to film several scenes twice, once where the characters say Sorcerer's Stone, and another where they say the Philosopher's Stone.
This is about the Philosopher's Stone.
This is about the Sorcerer's Stone.
Early on in the Harry Potter series, the filmmakers tried their hardest to do as many effects as they could practically. In the Sorcerer's Stone, the floating candles in the Great Hall were actually candle-shaped containers holding oil and burning wicks. They were suspended by wires on a rig to make them move up and down, giving the illusion of them floating. At one point, a wire holding one of the candles snapped and fell to the floor. While no one was injured, the rig was deemed a safety hazard, and CG candles were used in all of the following films. In the Chamber of Secrets, the animatronic puppet made for Fawkes the Phoenix was so realistic that actor Richard Harris thought it was a real bird when he first saw it. Similarly, a large animatronic was built for the basilisk in scenes that didn't require the use of CG. This was later repurposed into a full-scale dragon built for the Goblet of Fire shoot. For the Dementors in The Prisoner of Azkaban, Alfonso Cuarón brought on puppeteer Basil Twist to figure out a way to do the beasts practically. Twist found a technique that involved filming the puppets in water in slow motion and then reversing the film. However, it was impractical to do this on a large scale and had to be shelved. CGI was used for the Dementors in the end. The Great Lake scenes in the Goblet of Fire were filmed in a huge tank of water surrounded by blue screens. The tank was absolutely massive and held roughly 132,000 gallons of water. Finally, while it was obviously put together digitally, Daniel Radcliffe acted out every single part of the Seven Harrys scene in the Deathly Hallows Part 1 individually. Only the appropriate actors were present, but the scene still took over 90 takes to get right. Production designer Stuart Craig spent a lot of the first film's set budget on actual York stone for the floor in the Great Hall. The decision was questioned by others in the production, but the investment paid off, as the set withstood the perhaps millions of footsteps from hundreds of crew members all the way through the entire series, without ever needing to be replaced. Lucius Malfoy's long flowing hair was never mentioned anywhere in the books or the scripts, and was actually actor Jason Isaacs' idea. He was worried that his character would look too similar to Tom Felton's Draco Malfoy, and that the two wouldn't be easily differentiated. When he suggested giving him long hair, the design team loved the idea and ran with it. Director Alfonso Cuarón wanted to make Hogwarts feel like more of a real place instead of a group of sets, and decided to better establish the castle's layout. Because of this, more scenes were added in the hallways, walkways, or stairways connecting various important rooms and doorways. Additionally, Cuarón really liked the set used for Dumbledore's office, and tried to find an excuse to use it despite the script for Prisoner of Azkaban making no mention of the room. The scene where Lupin teaches Harry how to use a Patronus charm featured a repurposed version of that set, though it's just called the Astronomy Room in the script. In The Order of Phoenix, J.K. Rowling provided an extended family tree so the production team could accurately fill out the Black family tapestry in Grimmauld Place. Some of the names were never mentioned in the books, and she even told the filmmakers which members were disowned so portraits could be properly scorched out. For the destroyed parts of the castle in the Battle of Hogwarts in the Deathly Hallows Part 2, 5 29-ton trucks worth of polystyrene rubble were brought onto the set to accurately create a devastated landscape.
Brilliant.
Did you know? Though the Scott Pilgrim series of graphic novels is 6 volumes long, its film rights were sold right after the first book was published in 2004. Scott Pilgrim was created by Brian Lee O'Malley and distributed by comic book publisher Oni Press. In late 2004, Oni Press contacted producer Mark Platt to gauge interest in a film adaptation of O'Malley's books. This led to Universal Studios buying the rights to the novels and hiring Shaun of the Dead director Edgar Wright to helm the film. O'Malley continued working on the graphic novels during the film's production, but the final book wasn't published until weeks before the movie's wide release. As a result, the filmmakers weren't exactly sure how the series was going to end, and had to make something up for the movie. Originally, they planned to have Gideon Graves turn into a giant robot for Scott to fight. This idea was dropped when O'Malley told the crew it was nothing like his final showdown. The team also feared it had come off as a spoof of Transformers, and developed a new idea that was more in line with the books. An alternate ending depicted Scott and Ramona parting ways as friends, and Scott rekindling his relationship with Knives, but this was changed before the release of the film to show Scott and Ramona continuing their relationship. Director Edgar Wright explained, "The original ending, when we had test screenings, it would kind of divide people. Over that kind of process, Brian changed the endings of the books, and I was aware that the ending we had wasn't quite as satisfying as it should be. So we had the chance, and Universal were totally behind the idea, of shooting something new. When we screened it again, the scores went hugely up." Wright had another idea for an alternate ending where the events of the film would have been exaggerated in Scott's mind. In reality, he would have been a serial killer who gruesomely murdered all of Ramona's exes. This idea was dropped early in development. Like other Edgar Wright films, Scott Pilgrim is packed with hidden details. Scott and every member of the League of Evil X's have sequential numbers associated with them. Scott often wears a shirt that says 0 and is fond of the drink Coke Zero. Matthew Patel points with one finger and has one eye hidden by his hair, while Lucas Lee points with 2 fingers and has 2 tattooed on his neck. Todd Ingram is part of a 3-piece band and wears a shirt with a 3 on it, and Roxy Richter is fought in a bar called 4. The Katayanagi twins turned their volume mixers up to 11, which is 5 and 6 added together. Finally, all of Gideon's stat increases in the final battle are times 7, and the logo for his company is made up of 3 sevens turned on their sides. A lot of the post-production effects were either hand-drawn or created in a way to make them seem hand-drawn. Wright explained that, "We were almost making an entire animated film in post-production. They're not generic digital effects. However, the scene where Scott throws a package over his shoulder into a trash can wasn't tampered with in post-production. Michael Cera actually tossed the package blindly behind him, and it took 33 takes to get the package into the trash." Wright also told actors not to blink during takes to emulate the feeling of Japanese anime. This policy earned him the on-set nickname of the Blink Nazi. All of the stunt doubles summoned by Lucas Lee to fight Scott are the real-life stunt doubles for Chris Evans, the actor who plays Lee. Additionally, Lee's pompous final words were based on a real encounter Edgar Wright had with singer Pelle Almqvist. Wright met the Hive singer backstage at one of the band's concerts, where Wright said he was a big fan. Almqvist responded with, "Why wouldn't you be?" Ramona's phone number in the film, 212-664-7665, is actually a real phone number. Movies normally use numbers starting with 555 if a specific number is required, and most numbers in this range are fictitious. In the 60s, telephone companies urged Hollywood producers to use 555 numbers to prevent customers getting unwanted phone calls. Universal owns this particular number, which has also appeared in the movies Munich and The Adjustment Bureau to add a sense of realism. The number is currently disconnected, and calling it does nothing. Interestingly, 212 is the area code used for Manhattan, and Ramona lived in New York City before moving to Toronto in the film. Several real-world bands were hired to write music for Scott Pilgrim or to contribute songs to its soundtrack. The songs played by Crash and the Boys were written by Broken Social Scene, while the Katayanagi Twins' Battle of the Bands track was created by Japanese producer Cornelius. Black Sheep, the song performed by the Clash of Demon Head, is a cover of a song by the Canadian band Metric. Scott Pilgrim's original score was written by Nigel Godrich, a recording engineer and producer best known for his work with Radiohead. Other miscellaneous music within the film was written by hip-hop producer Dan the Automator. All music performed by Scott's band Sex Bomb was written by the musician Beck, who also appears in the film's soundtrack singing a completed version of Ramona, a song that Scott's character starts writing in the film. Actors Michael Cera, Mark Webber, Allison Pill, and Johnny Simmons all played their own instruments in the movie. Webber and Pill had no previous musical experience and had to learn how to play the guitar and drums respectively over the course of just a month's worth of rehearsals. According to Simmons, it was impressive how quickly Pill got the hang of the drums, learning the difficult instrument in about 2 weeks. The film begins with the same jingle heard when players turn on a copy of The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past for the Super Nintendo. Another Zelda song, the Great Fairy theme from Ocarina of Time, appears in the film during a dream sequence where Scott encounters Ramona. To obtain the rights to the song, Edgar Wright personally wrote to Zelda creator Shigeru Miyamoto to request permission, and even included part of the movie for Miyamoto to watch. In his letter, Wright described the music from Nintendo's games as the nursery rhymes to a generation. Miyamoto must have appreciated the sentiment, as the filmmakers were permitted to use the track.
Did you know? Nintendo has never had any real interest in seeing Mario faithfully adapted to the big or small screen. They usually have very little input on productions and choose to not exercise creative control. British director Roland Joffe originally negotiated for the rights to the Super Mario Bros. Movie. Regarding Nintendo, Joffe said, "I think they looked at the movie as some sort of strange creature that was kind of rather intriguing to see if we could walk or not." Nintendo considered the movie an experiment and believed Mario was a strong brand that wouldn't be ruined by a bad movie. History had proven that this was the case, as Mario had made appearances in film and television for a decade before the movie. Mario first appeared on TV very shortly after the character's debut in video games. In 1983, CBS aired Saturday Supercade, which featured animated shorts based on popular video games of the time. These included Frogger, Hubert, Pitfall, Donkey Kong, and Donkey Kong Jr. 3 years later, Japan had their own take on an animated Mario adventure adventure called Super Mario Bros. The Great Mission to Rescue Princess Peach. It's generally considered to be the world's first feature film based on a video game, although it was never released outside of Japan. It remains today in relative obscurity, having only a single publishing run on VHS and Betamax. The design for Luigi in the movie has a peculiar yellow and blue color palette. This is likely due to early promotional artwork for Luigi having a more varied range of colors. In 2014, Super Smash Bros. For the Wii U and 3DS included an alternate costume for Luigi based on his clothing from the film. Super Mario 64 also has a connection to the film. The way Mario swings Bowser around by the tail during boss battles was first seen in the movie a decade prior. In the year 1989, two separate Mario animated series debuted, one from Japan and one from the United States. The Japanese program was a series of direct-to-video specials based on fairy tales but starring Mario characters. The American animated series was a recurring Saturday morning entertainment block called the Super Mario Bros. Super Show. The late Lou Albano, the actor who played Mario, began his career as a professional wrestler in 1950. He was approached by DYKG with an offer to play Mario. At first, Albano wasn't interested, as he needed to shave off his trademark beard for the show's live-action segments. He was eventually talked into accepting the role by his wife and his friend, talk show host Regis Philbin. Lou Albano appeared on Live with Regis and Kathy Lee to promote the upcoming Super Mario show. Albano used his slot on the show to shave his beard in front of a live audience. The Super Mario Bros. Super Show had a series of spin-offs and rebrandings, but the most peculiar was a local broadcast from Southern California called King Koopa's Cool Cartoons. In the show, King Koopa would act as an MC between segments of cartoons. All of the animation from the Koopa Show were public domain, and ironically, none of the Mario cartoons were played. Nintendo was approached multiple times by big Hollywood studios wanting the rights to a Super Mario film. They were offered $5 million and even $10 million, but they ultimately settled with a small-time production company for $2 million. Interestingly enough, the first script that was presented to Nintendo was drastically different from the film that played in theaters. Originally, the movie was going to be a more comedic and fantasy-based story in the same vein as Shrek. The script's characters were more faithful to their video game counterparts. This included a reptilian Bowser that was intended to be played by Arnold Schwarzenegger. There were actual turtle-like Koopa Troopas, mushroom-like Goombas, and even a fungus-based Toad. Toad originally had a larger role in the movie, as a wisecracking sidekick similar to his role in the American animated series. This draft of the script was written by Jim Genowine and Tom S. Parker, a duo that would later write the Flintstones live-action movie. The team had trouble getting a studio to buy the project, so the director and writers were fired and new staff was brought in. Husband and wife Rocky Morton and Annabelle Jankel were hired to direct the film, neither of whom had any particular interest in video games. Jankel recalled, "I don't think either of us had ever fully involved ourselves in the game at all, which might have something to do with the end result. We played it for research. It's a bit like if you're doing an adaptation of something. You do your due diligence. But it's not like we were all up through the night playing it." The original fantasy-based script was repurposed at this point, and the familiar concept of a parallel world with humanoid reptiles was retrofitted into the old story. In fact, the writers already had a concept for a parallel world, and they simply adapted the film's characters to their pre-existing idea. A number of revisions were made to the script by new employees, and a creative tug-of-war ensued. One version had a direct reference to Die Hard, and Bruce Willis was intended to make a cameo. Another version took the self-aware sensibilities of Ghostbusters and portrayed Mario as a sleazy Bill Murray-type character. Actual production began with a new draft that was gritty and action-packed with strong political depth and social commentary. These mature themes are what originally attracted actors Bob Hoskins, Dennis Hopper, and Fiona Shaw to the production. But by the time they got on set, they were handed a completely different script. These mid-production rewrites happened so often that some of the actors stopped bothering to memorize their lines, knowing they'd be given new lines the next day. Bob Hoskins accepted the role of Mario, having no idea that the movie was based on a video game. He'd never heard of Mario before, and was made aware of the source material by his son well after filming had begun. Hoskins claims that Super Mario Bros. Was one of the lowest points in his career. "The worst thing I ever did, Super Mario Bros. It was a nightmare. It had a husband and wife directing whose arrogance had been mistaken for talent. After so many weeks, their own agent told them to get off the set." John Leguizamo later recalled the bizarre nature of the production with an interview for Super Mario Bros. The Movie Archive. That whole disco scene, they hired a whole bunch of strippers, and they were too scantily clad, because this was, you know, a children's video game. And that was conflicting for everybody. It was not an easy shoot because the ladies wanted to reveal everything. We didn't mind, but it wasn't the appropriate PG rating we were looking for. The film exhausted Hoskins and Leguizamo so much that they eventually started drinking scotch in between takes. The movie was tumultuous for everyone involved, but it was particularly dangerous for those on the sets. Many of the crew members were injured and electrically shocked. Bob Hoskins refused to use stunt doubles and as a result sustained multiple injuries during filming. He was shocked by electricity, stabbed 4 times, and nearly drowned. One stunt involved Leguizamo driving a van and slamming on the brakes while Hoskins held onto the outside. Upon slamming the brakes on the first take, the sliding doors slammed shut and broke Bob Hoskins' fingers. Hoskins' right hand was in a cast through the rest of the movie. The team's costume designer simply painted the cast to disguise it.
Unspoken. I fixed it.
The film took another strange turn after Disney bought the rights to the Super Mario movie partway through production. Designer David Snyder speculated that Disney wanted access to Nintendo's characters to integrate them into the Disneyland theme park. When Disney inspected what they thought was going to be a family-friendly production, they found a movie with references to drugs, prostitution, and Mad Max-style desert death races. Naturally, this caused yet another rewrite, and the tone was made completely family-friendly despite taking place in a dingy, dark, and derelict city environment.
Oh my God! Look at that! Get out of here!
Did you know? The plans to make an Avengers movie began all the way back in 2005. Marvel Studios announced the desire to develop the film as well as standalone movies for heroes like Iron Man and Captain America. Marvel also declared independence by allying with Merrill Lynch, the wealth management division of Bank of America. This deal would financially help Marvel produce its own movies and have total creative control, eliminating the need to work with other studios. Under this arrangement with Merrill Lynch, Marvel had budgets ranging from $45 to $180 million for each movie. Marvel wanted to establish some of its lesser-known characters before tackling an Avengers film, such as Iron Man, who was someone the general public knew little about prior to 2008. Up until the deal with Merrill Lynch, Marvel didn't have enough funding to produce movies, and had to license its characters to other major studios. This is why X-Men, Fantastic Four, and Deadpool belonged to 20th Century Fox, and how Spider-Man ended up with Sony. Disney ended up purchasing Marvel in 2009 for $4 billion, and the deal with Merrill Lynch eventually fizzled out. The Avengers was originally supposed to release in 2011, but was delayed for a whole year due to Thor and Captain America the First Avenger releasing in 2011. Jon Favreau, the director of Iron Man and Iron Man 2, and the head of Marvel Studios, Kevin Feige, were mostly worried about how to properly incorporate Thor with the more human characters like Iron Man. Favreau said, "It's going to be hard. Iron Man is very much a tech-based hero, and then with the Avengers you're going to be introducing some supernatural aspects because of Thor. The two work very well in the comic books, but it's going to take a lot of thoughtfulness to make all that work and not blow the reality that we've created." Feige's solution to this was simple: make Thor a little more grounded and based on science rather than magic and mythology. He said, "We're not doing the blow the dust off of the old Norse book in your library, Thor, and in the Thor of the Marvel Universe, there's a race called the Asgardians, and we're linked through this tree of life that we're unaware of. It's real science, but we don't know about it yet. The Thor movie is about teaching people that." Joss Whedon was first hired to direct the Avengers back in 2010. He announced his involvement at Comic-Con, saying what drew him to the project was how these people, the heroes, shouldn't be in the same room, let alone on the same team, and that is the definition of family. The first contribution that Whedon made was throwing away the first script for the movie, which was made by Zach Penn, writer of the second and third X-Men movies. In one of their first meetings together, Whedon told Feige that the script was poor and that they should get rid of it as fast as possible. Feige and the rest of Marvel Studios weren't pleased to hear this at first, but they trusted Whedon's judgment and allowed him to come up with his own ideas for the movie. After their meeting, Whedon went home and wrote 5 pages explaining his plans for the film while also coming up with the tagline, "The Avengers, some assembly required," making fun of the Avengers Assemble slogan from the comics. All of the actors loved Whedon's ideas and script, with Clark Gregg saying, "The script was funny and still tongue-in-cheek and really got the tone, the Tony Stark tone of the Marvel Universe, and still furthered and explored each one of those characters and those relationships." I found out later from other people involved that they had the same reaction, like, "Oh wow, everybody gets to play and it's going to be better than anything we reasonably hoped for." Whedon's deal with Marvel gave him a good amount of creative control, but he did have a few restrictions. He had to include Loki as the main villain, a battle where the superheroes fight each other in the middle, and an epic battle against the villains at the end. Whedon also had to finish the film in time for a May 2012 release. Some minor issues arose, such as making sure every character got enough screen time, and he also wanted both Ant-Man and the Wasp to appear, but he had to cut them out because the film already had way too many characters in it. They were even featured in the first draft before Black Widow was confirmed to be in the movie. Whedon also had a detailed backstory for Hawkeye written up, but had to strip it out because of the time limit. During the early planning stages, Hawkeye was a circus performer manipulated by villains to fight the Avengers. They also planned a brief scene between Iron Man and a brainwashed Hawkeye as a nod to the comics where Hawkeye was tricked into fighting Iron Man. Joss Whedon was still changing the script as the effects team were making the movie's ending battle sequence. Speaking of which, the crew had extremely limited time filming in Manhattan for the ending of the film. The effects team created a near-complete virtual Manhattan for the sequence, which was used for most shots during the fight. They did this by creating a model of the city and projecting huge amounts of photographs over the surface. The original cut of the film was over 3 hours long, and a good chunk of that footage can be seen on the Blu-ray. Most cut scenes revolves around Captain America and his struggles adjusting to the modern world. The final end credits scene, where all the heroes are eating shawarma, was added at Robert Downey Jr.'s request. He thought his final lines about trying shawarma would be more interesting and funny if the heroes immediately went to a shawarma restaurant right after the fight. Robert Downey Jr. also pushed Whedon to make Iron Man the main lead. He wanted the character to be in the opening sequence and drive the main plot. Whedon tried, but it ultimately wound up not working because the Avengers had to be about teamwork. It was Whedon's idea to have Thanos be the main villain, plotting everything in the shadows while Loki did his bidding. He wanted the Marvel Cinematic Universe to have a much bigger antagonist to drive the rest of the movies after the Avengers, and all of the executives, including Kevin Feige, loved the idea. Whedon revealed this in an interview with Slash Film, saying, "Thanos, for me, is the most powerful and fascinating Marvel villain. He's the great-granddaddy of the badasses, and he's in love with death, and I just think that's so cute." Somebody had to be in control and had to be behind Loki's work, and I was like, it's got to be Thanos. And the executives said, okay, and I'm like, oh my god. The Avengers would go on to become the first Marvel Cinematic Universe film to make $1 billion, and the first film to gross $200 million in the United States on its opening weekend. It surpassed The Dark Knight's $1 billion box office record to become the highest-grossing comic book movie of all time. It was also nominated for 74 awards and won 21 of them.
Did you know? The idea for Zootopia came from director Byron Howard wanting to make a movie similar to Disney's 1973 adaptation of Robin Hood. Howard loves animals and making animated features about them, and he felt a strong desire to make another after working on Tangled. Initially, that was the only idea both Howard and his co-director Jared Bush had to go on. The duo did intense research for almost a year, trying to find a way to make their movie different from the dozens of other films starring anthropomorphic animals. Howard came up with the idea of having both a talking bunny and fox as the main leads. He loved the concept of having a predator and prey working together. Zootopia wasn't originally set in a city. It actually started out as a spy movie set on a tropical island where the fox and bunny duo would get themselves into trouble. Howard decided to move away from the tropical setting and set the whole picture in a giant city. The idea of unraveling some sort of mystery, which was a part of the spy thriller theme, stuck. Both Howard and Bush started building a world and city that only animals could live in, and they did this mostly on their own. Howard, Bush, and the rest of the creative team investigated how to properly portray a world like that. Most of the research took place in Disney's Animal Kingdom and in Kenya, where animators studied different animals' fur colors and walk cycles. The filmmakers also consulted the Americans with Disabilities Act law specialists, and even heating, ventilating, and air conditioning experts to help develop a city that can host mammals ranging in size and who all live in different climates. Zootopia's urban design was influenced by cities like Las Vegas, Paris, New York City, and Shanghai. The creative team met up with an expert on the evolution of New York City to learn how small sectors like Chinatown and Little Italy came to be. However, they had to make sure that Zootopia did not just feel like an American city. Howard said, "We wanted to make sure that this felt like an international city. It shouldn't feel like an American city. We took influences from Shanghai and Hong Kong. There's European influences. We studied Brasilia, which is a very modern city in Brazil, which was founded in the 1960s, that we felt had to be the ultimate in modern living." The researching process was so grueling that the script was put on hold until the team was able to make everything as accurate as humanly possible. They found that animals in the natural world are 90% prey animals and only 10% are predators. Bush said 90% prey and only 10% predators, and that was really an interesting ratio. We started to look at the animals themselves, how they interrelate with each other. So for us on this one, research really did push a lot of the story. Nick Wilde, the fox, was initially the film's main character, with the bunny, Judy Hopps, being his sidekick. The fox always had to be a charming, sarcastic, likable, and snarky guy who loved to be cynical. It made sense for the bunny to be the total opposite, an optimist, which helped balance the two. However, having the fox as the main character almost ruined the entire movie. Howard and Bush focused on prejudices and biases that humans inherently have, and Zootopia was supposed to showcase this. Both directors thought seeing the city through the eyes of Nick Wilde, who hated Zootopia already, would not work. In order to get their message across, the optimistic Judy Hopps had to be the lead. Even when Nick Wilde was the main character, Judy Hopps kept stealing the limelight and pushing the fox into the background. The movie's focus changed from Nick to Judy sometime in November of 2014. Howard commented on the change, stating, "We asked, what are we saying with the movie? If we're telling this movie about bias, something that is everywhere and in all of us, whether we want to admit it or not, the character that's going to help us tell that message is Judy. She's an innocent from a very supportive environment where she thinks everyone is beautiful, everyone gets along. Then lets Nick, this character who knows the truth about the world, bop up against her and they start to educate each other. When we flipped that, it was a major flip, but it worked so much better." This forced the team to scrap and rework large portions of the film. However, practically everyone agreed that making Hops the lead would benefit the film in the long run. Disney also decided to add Wreck-It Ralph director Rich Moore to the Zootopia team to make things run a little smoother. Moore was tasked with helping Howard manage all of the changes associated with switching the lead role, and Howard embraced the extra help. Moore also helped ensure the movie's theme and moral message didn't come off as too preachy. For Moore, the real message in Zootopia is that the only person that truly defines who you are is yourself. For Byron Howard, Shakira's character Gazelle is the epitome of what Zootopia, the city, is all about. If you put your mind to it, you can become anything you want, but you'll still face challenges along the way. When Gazelle was first written, she was just a regular famous celebrity, but the character eventually morphed into an individual that speaks 6 languages and is very intelligent and sharp. Gazelle was originally much thinner. The animators worked with Shakira to make Gazelle look more like the pop star. Shakira said, "They asked me what I would like to see, and I told them, listen, first thing, hips. Give her some meat." The creative team also came up with several interesting locations in Zootopia the characters would visit, but they didn't make it in the final cut. One such place is Wild Times, where animals could let go and live out their animalistic nature. A predator can chase another animal there, for example, but they had to wear special predator costumes. The creative team was excited about all the locations they had made, but it was a struggle to give these places enough screen time without harming the movie's pacing. The filmmakers believed that they could make entire films set in areas like Sahara Square, Tundra Town, Rainforest District, and Bunny Burrow. Finding the perfect balance between showcasing what an interesting world Zootopia is, while also telling a proper story, was very important. The filmmakers plan on releasing all of the locations that didn't make the cut in the Blu-ray special features and in the film's art book. Less than conventional methods were used to market the movie. Allied Integrated Marketing, hired by Disney, allegedly appealed to the furry community to help promote the film. An email from an Allied representative was sent to the Seattle-based group Fur Life. The email asked the group to take pictures of themselves in costume and post them on social media with the hashtags Zootopia and ZooU. Furries were even offered prizes for their participation. When questioned about the emails, both Allied and Disney declined to comment on the matter.
Oh, goodness. They really did hire a bunny.
Did you know? Frozen is a remake of author Hans Christian Andersen's classic tale, The Snow Queen. Disney's desire to adapt the story to animation can be traced all the way back to the 1930s, even before Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs premiered. At the time, Disney planned to co-produce a feature-length biography about Hans Christian Andersen with Samuel Goldwyn's studio. The idea was that Disney would animate Andersen's stories, while Goldwyn would shoot live-action scenes of Andersen's life. Alongside The Snow Queen, Disney was interested in adapting Andersen's other stories. This included The Little Mermaid, The Ugly Duckling, and The Steadfast Tin Soldier, which were eventually adapted. However, Disney had issues with the character of the Snow Queen. She's extremely cruel in the tale, and Disney struggled to make her relatable. On top of this, the original story has an anticlimactic ending. The protagonist rescues her friend without a physical confrontation. No one knew how to fix these issues without severely deviating from Andersen's story. Production on the Snow Queen was halted around the start of World War II as Disney began to produce wartime propaganda instead. Goldwyn revisited the live-action Andersen film in 1952, but without any animated sequences, whereas Disney didn't dust off their project until the 90s. Although many well-known and talented creators took a stab at making the Snow Queen, including Tony Award winner Harvey Fierstein, nothing was satisfactory. Glenn Keane, who would go on to create Tangled, was heavily involved with adapting the Snow Queen in the early 2000s. He eventually left the project, unable to come up with a fun story that stuck to the source material. But things began looking up in 2008 when Pixar executive John Lasseter brought director Chris Buck onto the project. Buck's initial inspiration for the Snow Queen didn't come from Andersen's tale. It instead came from his desire to make a story with a different take on love, something that didn't involve the typical princess in despair trope that so many Disney films featured. Buck spent a few years coming up with the storyboards and rewriting the script. The commercial success of Tangled, alongside John Lasseter's guidance, finally got the project into full gear around 2012. At that point, Buck and producer Peter Del Vecchio still had Elsa as the main villain of the story. When they presented the project to Lasseter, he wasn't satisfied. Frozen's art director Michael Giaimo spoke about the project's lingering issues. I remember John saying the latest version of the Snow Queen story that Chris Buck and his team came up with was fun, very lighthearted, but the characters didn't resonate. They aren't multifaceted, which is why John felt audiences wouldn't really be able to connect with them. In this version of the story, Anna was a peasant who'd begged the Snow Queen, Elsa, to freeze her broken heart. Early sketches of Elsa showed her with short, spiky blue hair, light blue skin, and a coat made from living weasels. Co-director Jennifer Lee also mentioned how Elsa was planned to be the villain, but the story didn't go that way. Lee felt Elsa wasn't an evil person, that she just made bad choices in a difficult situation. This became obvious when the songwriters, husband and wife duo Robert Lopez and Kristen Anderson Lopez, were trying to come up with a villain song. They thought about how they'd feel if they were as isolated as Elsa, who had to repress her powers and get away from society. They abandoned the traditional villain song and instead wrote Let It Go in less than 2 days. When Lee, Buck, Lasseter, and the rest of the team heard the song, they finally knew who Elsa needed to be and began a heavy rewrite of the script. Elsa went from a villain to a more relatable individual who was just misunderstood. Around the same time, someone suggested making Anna and Elsa sisters. This new sibling approach, combined with the reworked Elsa, led to an entirely different movie. According to producer Del Vecchio, Disney does not see Frozen as a princess movie. They happen to be princesses, but we don't think about it that way, so I always get a bit thrown when people talk about this. We want to make them really believable and not set them up on a pedestal. Our version of these characters should feel real and be relatable to things you might go through in your life. Making things real applied to more than just the writing. For research, the Californian animators were sent to Wyoming to experience a wintry environment. They particularly needed to capture the feeling of walking through deep snow, and several animators, including the men, did just that while wearing a dress. The film's lighting team also traveled to Quebec. There, the team stayed in a hotel made of ice so they could study how light refracts and reflects in ice and snow. In a similar fashion, Frozen's visuals and overall aesthetic were inspired by visits to Norway. One example is the way Arendelle Castle is built in a fjord, while most other Disney castles rest on a precipice. Speaking of castles, the one Elsa created went through many revisions. Artists finally settled on a design they felt was natural and imitated the geometry of a snowflake. The sequence where Elsa builds the castle itself also took 9 whole months to develop. According to Jennifer Lee, the team spent considerable time trying to explain how Elsa got her powers. Lee said, "We had this whole explanation, like when Saturn is in alignment with such and such on the 1000th year a child would be born, and blah blah blah. And then, ultimately, you almost throw it away with one line. So the line is just like, was she born with the powers or was she cursed? And she's born with it, and that's the last piece of it." The team ultimately found that trying to explain the powers just brought up more questions and made them have to define the rules of Elsa's magic. They decided these explanations were convoluted and limiting and got rid of them altogether. The voice of Princess Anna, Kristen Bell, originally auditioned to play Rapunzel in Disney's Tangled. After hearing Bell's voice, however, the casting director asked her to audition for Frozen. The voice of Elsa, Idina Menzel, also auditioned for the role of Rapunzel. A casting director secretly recorded Menzel's impressive performance on their phone and showed it to the Frozen team. Disney wanted to make sure Menzel and Bell had chemistry and asked the duo to sing together. Since none of the music had been composed yet, they sung The Wind Beneath My Wings. The song Do You Want to Build a Snowman was cut from the film multiple times, and whether it should be included was heavily debated among staff. It was almost left out for good, but was put back in at the last minute. The character Olaf may have been inspired by another Hans Christian Andersen tale called The Snowman. In the story, a snowman falls in love with a warm stove but can't go near it because he would melt. This resembles Olaf's fantasies about hot summer weather. In an interview, Jennifer Lee confirmed the character Hans is partially inspired by the evil mirror from the original Snow Queen story. This was shown with Hans' sociopathic tendencies. He'll reflect on a person's desires and adapt to get on someone's good side. Interestingly, Hans' character model was used to determine differences in height between humans and animals while making Zootopia. In the film itself, a pastry shop named after Hans can be seen in Little Rodentia. And this isn't the only Frozen reference in Zootopia. 2 elephant girls can also be seen wearing outfits based on Elsa and Anna in Tundra Town.